All right, so there's a lot of different types of loops, and the first one we're going to learn about is the while loop. In this next quiz, you'll write code for the while loop, and the while loop will help us create text views for each element of the words list and add it to the layout. And by the end of this coding task, your app will look like this. So while is a special Java keyword. It means that we should keep executing a block of statements, denoted by instructions in this diagram, as long as a certain condition is true. So we continue to execute the set of instructions while this condition is true, and essentially move through it in a loop. So to go into more detail, while the condition between the parentheses is true, we execute all the instructions in this block of code that lies between these two braces. And then after that, we go back to the condition again, and then check to see if that's true. And if it is true, we execute these set of instructions again. Then we go back to the condition, check to see if it's true, and if it is, execute this set of instructions again. And then if we go back to the condition, and at any point it's false, then we skip over the set of instructions and exit the loop, and continue with the rest of the code that comes after it. So this condition determines how many times the code inside this while block will be executed. Often the condition will be testing the state of a variable. So we can set up a counter variable before we begin the loop. And at the end of each iteration, so movement through, we can update that variable. And at some point, we're going to update the variable such that the condition will be false. And that causes us to exit the loop. So here's an example of the while loop. And it corresponds with the play sound example that we mentioned earlier. Well, how do we ever arrive at this code? Whenever we're debating with ourselves whether to write a loop or not, so we can ask ourselves 3 questions. What task are we trying to do each time? How many times do we need to repeat the loop? And as a result, what is the condition of the loop? So in this case, for the first question, what is the task we do each time? We need to play a sound. To figure out the condition, we ask ourselves the second question. How many times do we repeat the loop? And for example, we say we want to repeat it 3 times. If that's the case, we can make the condition to be that the count variable must be less than 3. So this is assuming that the count variable is initialized at 0 and then is updated each time. So to see how this while loop is run, let's keep track of our variable count. So first, the count variable is initialized at 0, and then we enter the while loop. Now we determine if the condition is true or false. And this condition says that count needs to be less than 3. In our case, 0 is less than 3, so the condition is true. That means we can continue into the while block and execute these lines of code. So we call the method playSound. And imagine that playSound is a valid method defined somewhere else that plays a sound on the device. Afterwards, we update the count variable by 1. So now count has a value of 1, and we move back to the condition. So we check our test condition and check if the count variable is still less than 3. Well, 1 is less than 3, so we're good to go, and continue back into the while loop. So we execute these set of instructions again. We play sound, so ding, and then we update the count variable to 2. Now the test condition is still true because 2 is less than 3, so we play the sound again. Now we update the count variable to 3, and when we go back to the condition, this time the condition fails because 3 is not less than 3. So once the condition is false, we exit the loop and continue with the code that comes after it. So to summarize, we've executed the code inside the loop 3 times. And that means we've played the sound 3 times on the device. So as you can see, a loop allows us to repeat behavior with a concise number of lines without copying and pasting the same code over and over again. So here's one more example of while loops before I send you off to write your own. Assume that the code that we'll be talking about will be run inside the numbers activity after you've created the words list. So I've set up an example scenario where the task I want to repeat is to print out a log statement for a specific item in the list based on an index variable. And say I want to repeat the loop 4 times, so that the condition is that we keep repeating the loop as long as the index variable is less than 4, assuming that the index variable starts off at 0 and then increments 1 at a time. So to write out this code, we create the index variable first and initialize it to 0. So this line of code will live outside the loop. When we start the while statement, we need to use the while keyword in Java, followed by parentheses, for the condition. So the condition is that the index variable should be less than 4. And if we want to repeat it 4 times, it should repeat once for index 0, again for index 1, again for index 2, and then lastly for index 3 before exiting the loop. Now inside the while loop, we can write instructions for the task. We want to print out a log statement for a specific item in the list based on the index value. This log statement has the tag numbers activity, and the message is index, followed by the index variable, along with value, followed by the string value at that position in the words list. And that's all the instructions that we need for this task. All right, so last thing within the body of this while loop is that we need to update the index variable by 1. So we haven't seen this syntax before of index plus plus. But this is a shorthand that means the same thing as setting the index variable to be index equals index plus 1. All right, so now you're intimately familiar with how to write a loop in Java. Go ahead and apply what you learned to fix our Miwok app code to create and display a text view for each element in the words list using a while loop. So pick up where we last left off in the numbers activity, where we're manually creating 3 text views and adding them to the linear layout without a loop, and modify it to use a while loop instead. So now we're going to update the Miwok app to use the while loop. So for the first task, remove the log messages in number activity in the onCreate method. For the second task, modify activity underscore numbers to change the relative layout into a linear layout. Then set the linear layout orientation to be vertical, and then add a view ID called root view. Lastly, modify the numbers activity onCreate method so that the code uses a while loop to create and display a text view for each element in the words list. Remember, you can start off where we last left off with the code for the numbers activity, which creates 3 text views manually, without using a loop. So after completing steps 1 through 3, the numbers activity in your app should look like this. So if you need a hint, I've added an example of a while loop down below, and there's an example of the output as well. So good luck!